Left of the box. Mara. I thought it was a good interview, probably talking about Jordan Peterson and Pierre Poilievre. Well, I hope you stick around. I'm not going to be talking too positively about it, but I hope you stick around to just hear a lot of what, the people on the left, how we actually view what happens in these, like what they're talking about, picking apart some of the lies and things of that sort. Because, I'm very concerned about the future of this country and for the well-being of people in it. And that's where my advocacy comes from. That's where this channel comes from, is I want people to have, as best quality of life as possible. And I'm worried that under Pierre Poilievre, the complete opposite is going to happen. So when I talk smack about Pierre Poilievre and Jordan Peterson, it's not because I'm just mad at them or I'm reactive and stuff like that. It comes from a place of genuinely wanting the best outcome for as many people as possible. And yeah, they're also dorks. Like, that's the thing. They're dorks. They're dorks. So, I hope you're able to stay around and watch it. You don't like my music. Not sure I've seen you in the sandbox before, so welcome. Jordan Peterson used to be a respected professor at U of T. Yeah, used to be. Seeing a lot of new names in the sandbox, probably because of the title of my video. Because it probably feeds into more of the right-wing-ish algorithms. But like I said, if anybody is here who is generally speaking fans of Pierre Poilievre and Jordan Peterson, I'd ask that you actually hear the counter arguments to what they're saying. Anyway, let's get into it. So, like I said, there was a sit-down conversation with Jordan Peterson and Pierre Poilievre on YouTube. And let's see, how much attention could it possibly get? Canada isn't a big country population-wise or anything. And let's see. Oh, well over 2 million people at this point have now watched the video. Great. That is wonderful. Wonderful right there. Yeah. And it is an hour and 40 minutes long. So we will not be watching the whole thing. But other people have done me the service of watching the whole thing and breaking it down. So we'll go to this Twitter thread here. I haven't watched all the clips, so we get to watch them together. Like, the thing is that Pierre Poilievre has been working towards becoming prime minister now for years and years and years. And I saw this coming way back when he was doing advertising for cryptocurrency, and he went to a sandwich store and was buying a sandwich with crypto and things of that sort, that he was definitely just, going to whatever right-wing talking points there is. And in some of these threads, it actually gets broken down quite nicely or horribly. Just what Pierre Poilievre is doing, and dislike him as you may, as I do, his strategy, it's pretty good. Like, it is pretty good. And it has to be pretty good because he's not charismatic. He's not a good talking figure. And so in order to win over the masses, you have to have really sound strategy. And he's put the work into it. Meanwhile, the Liberals just kind of close their eyes and say, well, everything is fine, so we don't need to do anything. We don't need to change anything. While totally ignoring the pain and the suffering everyone is going through and how much more difficult life has become for people, because the Liberals tend to be a little condescending when it comes to that sort of thing. They tend to pat you on the head and say, everything is fine, the economy is great, I don't know what you're complaining about. But Poilievre validates that. He acknowledges it. Unfortunately, a lot of the policies that he wants to put in place would do the complete opposite of helping. It will make things a lot worse. And the thing is that a lot of people who are just fans of Poilievre, they don't know that because he doesn't actually talk much about policy in a lot of his campaign speeches that he's been doing, a lot of his publicity stunts. He doesn't actually talk about what he plans to get through. You learn more about his policy when you see him sit down with journalists, like news, mainstream news journalists, and some things tend to slip out at that point. Or there's coded language being put in indicating things that he plans on doing. Like the mere fact that he said that he's not against using the notwithstanding clause to reform bail. That in it itself is alarming, because the whole reason why he would use the notwithstanding clause is to violate people's protected rights in this country. That is it. And why would he stop there? So we're heading into some pretty scary times, and I've covered it a fair bit on my channel. Some of the language that he was using in interviews that aren't in mainstream, that are right-wing, that I guess he figures isn't going to get out to the wide populace that much. He becomes much more blatant at what he plans to do, and making it things like illegal to do protests, depending on what you're protesting, of course, to then want to deport all people who aren't Canadian citizens if they're taking part in these protests. The thing is that people in these protests, and people in Canada in general, might not be Canadian citizens, but they might be here legally. Like they might have grounds for being here through visas. They're applying to become Canadian citizens, their refugee status. There are other levels of properly being allowed to be in Canada, but not being a citizen. And so then to just arbitrarily start deporting them because you don't like what they're protesting, again, it's very worrisome, a lot of where he plans to go with this. But let's watch. So Paris Marx has this thread with a whole bunch of clips, and we're going to watch them together. I haven't actually, like I said, I haven't actually watched a lot of this. I've seen just a few snippets here and there. So Pierre Poilievre says Canadians are too obsessed with race because of wokeism, and agrees with Jordan Peterson that Canada essentially had to invent and import racism because it didn't exist here before recent decades. Canada is so fucked if this guy forms government. And we're going to get a lot more into this, but Canada was founded on white nationalism. Like quite literally, that is what the country was founded on. White nationalism and the genocide of Indigenous peoples. Like it didn't get imported. That's how it started. And it didn't go away. It's still been very much alive in this country. Let's listen.
And by the way, put aside race, this obsession with race that wokeism has reinserted.
Well, invented even.
Invented in many ways.
When I moved to Toronto, it was as race blind as any country, as any city could be.
Right.
Right. And that's flipped. And it's flipped because of that obsessive concern with race, right? That was something we 100% did not need in Canada, right? It's,
I've lived in Toronto, and it's never been race blind there. Racism has been rampant, but also the nice thing about Toronto, when I lived there anyway, was how multicultural it was and how aware of everyone's backgrounds people were. It was very common for people, when you were just meeting them, to say, hi, hello, what's your name, and where are you from? And that was just out of curiosity, because there was such mixed backgrounds in Toronto when it comes to immigrants or first-generation folks. And so there was a genuine curiosity of where people came from in Toronto. But racism was still happening. It was still happening.
Basically, what would you say, imported and invented racism in Canada, right?
Well,
as a consequence of policy.
Wokeism seeks to divide people into these different groups and subgroups, and we see...
I would really, really love for Pierre Poilievre to actually define what he means by wokeism. He uses the word all the time. You know, the woke people protesting genocide and stuff like that. Woke anti-Semitism is a phrase that he's come up with. I really, really would like to know what he means by that, and then we could actually see if he applies it equally across the board with things, or if it's just a word that he inserts because it's a catchphrase. It's a word that gets people attention.
See the results in a 250% increase in hate crimes. But we're going to get back to the basic principle that people are judged based on their individual character and humanity rather than by their group identity. And
that's never been the case in this country. It's never been the case. And I'm just catching out of the corner of my eye. Ragnar Lodbrok, he already defined it. Okay, I'll have to look into it and see where it is, because I am very curious to know what his definition of wokeism is.
That is actually, ironically, the most unifying thing we can do to bring our country back together. And as Lincoln put it, to bind up the nation's wounds.
According to Pierre Poilievre, it was invented and imported when wokeism took over Canada. I don't think Canada invented racism, but it definitely did participate with it. And like I said, this country was literally founded on white nationalism. So the next one is wondering what the Conservatives will do to social programs if they return to power under Poilievre. He says those socialist policies like public health care and the like are actually bad for the poor and redistribute towards the super wealthy. So they need to be cut.
Working class to the super wealthy.
So the socialist policies that provide goods and services to Canadians, let's say, or denizens of other countries, by printing money, actually punish the poor brutally.
Oh, absolutely.
In consequence of the inflation that they generate.
Yes, I mean, all the socialist policies in practice redistribute from the working class to the super wealthy in practice. Mm-hmm. And I can prove that again and again and again.
In theory.
In practice.
Sorry, what was that?
Practice redistribute from the working class to the super wealthy.
These things take money from the working class and distribute it to the wealthy. These socialist policies. He's describing capitalism. That's what capitalism does. That's not what socialism does. That is what capitalism does. They take money from the working class and then it gets redistributed up top. And that's been making the income gap larger and larger and larger in this country for quite some time. But it's always cute when they try to, make people afraid of this idea of socialism that's going to steal your money and give it to the wealthy and stuff. When they are just talking about capitalism, it's what's happening. It's what they want to do more of.
Socialist policies in practice redistribute from the working class to the super wealthy in practice. Mm-hmm. And I can prove that again and again and again.
In theory.
In practice.
Yeah.
In practice, all the redistribution that happens in these so-called socialist countries ultimately goes from the working class to the super wealthy. That is the reality.
You see, in proper socialist setting, the money, like excess money, taxes and stuff, come from the working class, but then it goes to the government to put into socialized programs such as housing and healthcare and Medicare and all of that sort of stuff, which will then benefit the working class. And so they're getting a return on the money that they're putting in. Whereas what he's explaining with socialism, where the working class money goes up to the ultra wealthy, and then they get no return, they get no better healthcare or anything of that sort, that is capitalism. That's capitalism. That's not socialism. Socialism actually provides safety nets for people and whatnot. Throughout the interview, you can see how Poilievre has deceptive but effective stories and cherry-pick stats that serve his agenda. He'll fabricate a narrative that government spending is what's driving up home prices to distract from developer or speculator profiteering.
I have a buddy whose family moved here from Italy back in 1973, His father worked paving roads, and his mother made sandwiches in a senior's home. They were able to pay off their home 10 minutes from Parliament Hill in 7 years.
Right.
Their grandchildren wouldn't be able to save up a down payment for that home in 15 years, and they will be university educated with all the advantages of having been here 2 decades. That is the consequence of the money supply growing vastly quicker than the stuff that money buys. So what we have to do is stop growing the money supply and start growing the stuff money buys, right? Produce more energy, grow more food, build more homes. We have to unleash the free enterprise system. You know,
He used to be housing minister under Stephen Harper. This guy, he used to be the housing minister. Starting way back in the 80s, both the Liberals and Conservatives have put in policies, have done things that have led to the housing crisis of today. Both parties are responsible, not just one or the other, both. And that is, they simply haven't kept up the housing supply to meet the demand for almost a generation now. And they instead of building socialized housing, affordable housing, it's gone to developers. We're allowing foreign investment into housing. We're allowing housing to just sit empty because somebody is going to make money from it. We're allowing corporations to buy up a whole bunch to make them into rental properties, Airbnbs, and things of that sort. This is the fault of both governments up to this point. But for him to say that it's as simple as just building more housing, it takes a lot more than that at this point. We're in so much trouble when it comes to housing. And like I said, he used to be the housing minister, and things didn't get better under Stephen Harper. They got worse. So he's in part responsible for this crisis that we're in right now. And simply using a slogan of building housing isn't good enough to actually fix the problem we're in. He likes to use a lot of slogans when he's talking, but he doesn't actually talk about the underlying policy put into it and what that means. Because if you build a lot more houses, but then you don't make them socialized, you don't make them affordable, and you just sell them off to developers, it doesn't help the situation. It doesn't, make it easier for people to buy housing. And again, housing is such a complex issue because it's not just the fact that housing prices have skyrocketed more than any other comparable country. Canada is by far the worst when it comes to housing prices, but it's also just the affordability of everyday living in Canada has gotten exceedingly worse as well. So you have two things going like this, and the housing market is just keep on getting worse and worse and worse because of it. So we have a lot of empty homes, and we have a lot of rich developers getting richer, getting money through government programs and stuff to build houses no one can afford. So it's funny to hear politicians suggest that housing should be dirt cheap because Canada has a lot of land and that it's just government making it so expensive. But there's a reason 90% of Canadians are within 100 miles of the U.S. border.
But we've got so much land. We should have the most affordable housing in the world. It should be dirt cheap because we have the most dirt. We just need to get the government out of the way. The same goes for our resource sector. Why is it that we're still importing oil when we've got the world's third biggest supply? Why is it we can't export our natural gas overseas? But we've got so much land.
Yeah, so a lot of that land that Canada has isn't exactly habitable. It's very difficult to build there. It's very difficult to get supplies and material there. Some of that land is not Canada's land. It's Indigenous land. Some of that land is very pristine ecosystems, wildlife, for clean water, things of that sort. If you start paving over a lot of this, we're going to lose a lot of the things we have that we take for granted, like the clean water, like farmland. A lot of it is farmland, good land for farming. We're in an environmental, like a climate crisis right now. Now is not the time to start paving over some of the carbon sinks of the world. And we don't need to. That's the thing. We don't need to expand out. We can expand up. So more high rises, more fourplexes, more infill, more zoning changes, things of that sort. Like we could easily solve the housing crisis right now by better investment on what we already have and building up and changing zoning than to expand at all. We don't need to. We've already built on enough land to sustain and build our housing market as it is. And then it also comes to the extreme costs of building further out away from communities, because just the cost to transport materials, to build the infrastructure to get out to those areas and stuff. And for what? Like that's the thing. Like you're going to make a town in the middle of the prairies. What's the drive for people to go there if there isn't something, some sort of economy there that would bring people there in the first place? Like a lot of people, it is true, 90% of the population lives within 100 kilometers of the border, because that's where the hubs are. That's where the economy is. That's where the easy access to trade and transportation to the United States is. All the northern communities that we have, life up there is horrendously expensive because it's very hard to ship goods up there. It's very hard to find qualified people for services like healthcare or counseling or any sort of professionals that you would think of. It's very hard to get them to move up north because, like I said, there's very little up there to draw people. As I said before, we don't need to. It's not something we need to do. We have enough built-on land already to easily expand the housing market to where we need it. So Poilievre says Justin Trudeau is an authoritarian socialist that wants to control every aspect of Canadian lives and all the industries in the country. You don't have to like Trudeau to know that's complete bullshit. I don't like Trudeau, and I know, yeah, he's not an authoritarian. He's not a socialist. He's neither of those things. He's a neo-lib capitalist.
What I'm about to say is not a shock to anyone. We have a prime minister who is dedicated to a extremely radical ideology. It is just a rehashed socialism that has been discredited again and again and again throughout the ages. And his basically authoritarian socialism has guided him throughout his entire prime ministership. He believes in a state that controls every aspect of your life, your money, your speech, your thought. He controls the economic, all of the industries of the country. Every time.
Sorry, just quickly, if Justin Trudeau had the ability to control people's thoughts, this guy wouldn't be running for office right now. They always want to make Justin Trudeau a much more bigger boogeyman than he currently is. But there is so much legitimate stuff to criticize Justin Trudeau on. And I do, believe me, I do. You don't need to make up things to make him a poor figure in the Canadian political system. There's lots of issues with him. And I've gone over plenty of those issues before. But then to make up this idea, to just fearmonger that he's some sort of authoritarian socialist, because yeah, those two things are extremely compatible. Yeah. There's no need for it. And it would make Poilievre more likable on a grander scale to people who don't like his right-wing rhetoric, who think he's gone too extreme. It would actually make him more likable to a larger group of people if he simply did attack Justin Trudeau on his actual policies and not some made-up fantasy of him being some sort of authoritarian.
Time that has been tried, it is a complete disaster. So there's no mystery involved. It is the same old disastrous outcome that results from the same old disastrous policies.
Right.
So one thing I do find interesting is that Poilievre has taken the lesson that many, say, center-left parties need to learn to stop watering down their agendas to try to attract those who don't agree with them. He says he'll be shamelessly right-wing in government.
This is the mistake that conservative parties around the world have made countless times. They think, well, anybody who's got a conservative mindset is already voting for me, so I can go off and chase the ideas of my political opponents, and then everyone will love me because I'll have the conservatives due to the fact that I have the name conservative, and then I'll have all these other people because I've embraced their contrary direction. And in the short term, it works because you manage to have all of these people under, and all of the different political ideologies captured in one tent. But the problem happens when the policies are a disaster. This is the mistake that...
Again, don't like him, but he's been very good on strategy. And that's, again, we need a party in Canada that is shamelessly progressive. At one point, that was the NDP. They were the Socialist Party of Canada type thing. But they've gone more and more milquetoast, more and more center-leaning. But if we had like a progressive left-leaning party out there that said, no, we are just simply going to socialize all medicine, not just a couple drugs. We're going to socialize all of it, make it universal pharmacare completely across the board, universal dental care across the board, universal hearing, eye care, all sorts of physical health and mental health, universal mental health care, because that does not actually exist in Canada. If we had a progressive party actually boldly stating these things, they would win in a landslide. Because regardless, again, if you take partisan politics out of it, if you just strip away the party name and you say, here are the policies, most people agree on things that they want. We all want better access to healthcare. We all want affordable housing. We all want to be able to afford to go out and get groceries and live a comfortable life. That's what everyone wants. And the Conservatives they do this thing where they say that's what they're going to do by privatizing everything, but that's the complete opposite. It will make it more difficult for more people to be able to access those same things, the very limited socialized programs that we have right now. But if we had like some sort of progressive leader out there that is really just bold and not shying away, they would actually garner a lot of that. Because right now, the Conservative Party under Poilievre has actually brought over a lot of the working class that the NDP used to have, because again, he's speaking to people's frustrations. He's validating their pain. And the NDP has been doing a very piss poor job of doing that. And we need a bold, what I want to see before the next election is a leadership race, both in the Liberal Party and in the NDP, because then that could help, launder the ideas. No, that's not the right word. There's a phrase for it when you put the ideas out there to be tested, so that people can actually fight over policies and places that they want to go, things that they want to do, and make it very public as to, these are the things that we're going to offer. Should I get in? That sort of thing. Because right now, if there's no change in either of those parties, and I mean bold change, not just a leader change, but bold change in their platforms, they're toast. They're absolute toast. Poilievre says that once the Conservatives take power, his supporters must remain engaged to push not just federal lawmakers, but those in other level of government to adopt his extreme right-wing agenda. Companies will also be expected to sell a deregulatory agenda.
I'm going to have to put out a call to Canadians that they have to stay politically active. They can't assume that simply by changing.
Okay, this is so frustrating because he's right. Again, his strategy throughout the past couple of years has been spot on. And it's one of my frustrations. And what I'm trying to do is that when the election comes, you vote for the least worst option. That's that. And if you don't like any of your options, then you have to remain politically engaged the rest of the time and make sure that when the next election happens, that you have people there you want to vote for. People there that actually represent your values and will put through policy that you want. But so many people put their head in their sand. Like even during the election, so many people are unengaged. They're politically illiterate in this country that he's able to energize his base by talking to all these culture war issues and using these, there's a word in my head about it. Sensational, like these sensational phrases and catchphrases and stuff, slogans. And because of that, and he's also stoking the flames of their anger. He's stoking the flames of a lot of hatred. And that energizes people. It makes them wake up and get out there. And the rest of, like, a lot of the center just stays asleep. As long as things aren't affecting them directly, they stay asleep. And they don't get engaged. But we need people to be engaged in politics every day, around the year. You know, you have to be constantly pushing your politicians to do the right thing. You have to get involved with municipal politics. You have to get involved with all the different policies. Find out what your politicians are voting on and make your voice heard through contacting them, through emails, or trying to set appointments to see them. Protesting, strikes, things of that sort. We need to get so much more politically engaged in this country than what we currently are if we want to stave off the worst of what this guy is going to bring in.
Changing by voting in an election that everything is going to, all the problems are going to reverse instantaneously. Like, I will need people to put pressure on the Senate to adopt my economic reforms. I will need people to put pressure on their mayors and local councillors to get out of the way and let us build homes. I will need businesses to actually do their part. I mean, our corporate Canada is so completely incompetent when it comes to politics. They're going to have to start to fight for the policies that are good for their workers more aggressively. And I've said that to them. They need to fire their incompetent lobbyists and actually go to the people and make the arguments for the reforms that I'm talking about. I'm going to have to put out a call to Canadians that they have to stay politically active. They can't.
Yes, we need more co-ops and unionized workforces. And people need to get politically engaged in order to make that happen. We need to give the power to the workers, to their organizations. Give them a seat at the table, as opposed to just allowing the ultra-wealthy to maintain their ultra-wealth and make it even worse, the income gap even worse. So Canada's climate-denying conservatives are explicitly making the case that generative AI's massive energy use is not only a good thing, but provides a big new market for oil and gas, and that they intend to exploit while throwing in nuclear as the greenwashing piece.
We're going to need data centers for AI and blockchain and countless other things.
I've never dealt with AI. I've never used it. I'm already done with it. It needs to go. It needs to go. Everything about AI just seems so wrong and takes away so much from humanity. Like, not just our creativity, our ability to express ourselves and get out there, but also what it does to the environment. The amount of resources it takes for blockchain and AI, for what it gives, is unconscionable. Destroying the world so that you can have a conversation with a fake person, as opposed to teaching people to have real relationships with real people that doesn't do anything to the environment. Like, this is just it. Right now, the environment, the climate, it is going to collapse. It's the thing. Like, right now, the Conservative Party, the right-wing agenda is going to come in. It's how we prepare to deal with it and eventually reverse track. And that's what's happening with the climate right now, only on a much bigger and longer scale. There is nothing we can do now to stop a lot of the worst outcomes. But what we can do is mitigate it, and eventually, at some point, start turning things around again. But it's going to take a lot of time. And the thing is that a lot of the sacrifices that we have to do now won't be seen for a long time. Whereas a lot of people want to see that immediate exchange. They want to see the immediate outcomes, the immediate rewards. But that's not how it works. That's why we're in this crisis right now. Because this has been happening for, decades and decades and decades. because it takes a long time until you hit a tipping point, and then all of a sudden it's like over the edge, and so it's going to take a long, long time to fix the damage that we've done and start to reverse course, and we're never going to get back to where we were. We're going to have to find a new normal and mitigate a lot of the damage that happens. But it is doable to do that. It is doable to turn around a lot of the worst. It is doable to mitigate it. And we need to focus on that. Whereas still, so many people, since it's not immediately affecting them, they put their head in the sand. But the thing is that for most people, it is affecting them already. I would imagine that most people at this point know or has been through some sort of environmental disaster, a flood or a severe storm or a forest fire. I am fairly certain at this point, if it didn't happen to you, it happened to someone you knew. And I can say, yeah, absolutely. I had family in northern Alberta that had to flee their community because of forest fires. There's been massive floods going through town. There's been all that sort of stuff. We're feeling the effects, but we still just keep on trying to brush it off, saying it's a one-off or it's this or that or the other thing. And people really need to wake up to the reality of what's happening to this environment. It's not a future case scenario. It is happening now. And it's the people with the least who suffer the most. It's the people living with poverty. It's the people living with disabilities that get hit the hardest when these things happen. Like when the heat dome was over BC. A lot of the people who died, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people, almost 1,000 people who died in that. You're looking at people who were unhoused, people who lived with poverty and couldn't afford air conditioning, people living with disabilities where the heat exacerbated it. If you look at people who die in floods or forest fires, oftentimes it's the people who can't run, that can't make it out. And so since a lot of the people who can afford insurance, a lot of the people who are able-bodied that can flee these things, that can rebuild their lives afterwards, since it's still not making it to the point where they completely suffer and can't rebuild, a lot of people just keep on putting their head in the sand. And after a disaster, be like, oh, we'll just rebuild. Instead of looking at the absolute dire consequences of not paying attention to it now. And AI and blockchain, it's disgusting that it's allowed in doing what it's doing to the environment for the return of what it does is absolutely bonkers that it's allowed to happen.
That we have the energy for. It takes tremendous amount of energy to
Right.
power these data centers. Apparently a chat GPT inquiry is 10 times more energy intensive than a Google inquiry. But,
That's for sure.
but we could be powering these data centers with Canadian natural gas generators, with nuclear. We have the biggest supply of uranium. We invented the CANDU. We have the incredible nuclear physicists and engineers. 60% of Ontario's energy already comes from nuclear. So we could be powering these facilities, and they're just beasts that are going to gobble up electricity.
Yeah, the tech companies are absolutely desperate for it.
We're going to need data centers for.
So finally, Pierre Poilievre thanks Jordan Peterson for standing up for free speech, which for Peterson started with refusing to respect his students' choice of pronouns and has escalated from there.
Also, I, on behalf of all Canadians, want to thank you for your immense courage and the personal political and non-political price that you have paid for standing up for your convictions and defending freedom of speech, because I know you have paid a very big price for that. But you have never bent, you have never backed down, you've had a spine of steel, and there are countless other people who will have the freedom to express themselves because you paid the price for them. So thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. It's been a privilege, far more than a price.
Also, on behalf.
Keep in mind, some of the consequences he faced with his speech issues was his psychology license. He had to go and take an online course on how to act in public because he was telling people to unalive themselves. He was calling somebody, a doctor who did trans surgery, a butcher. Like, you can have free speech, but you can't have consequences free speech. There's going to be that. Plus, the whole gender pronoun thing that he first originally got famous for, nobody was threatened to go to jail with it if you use the wrong pronouns. Like, he blew it so much out of proportion. It was simply being that people, trans folks and non-binary folks, that the pronouns, that their identity was included in a protected group that already, so that category already existed within Canada's hate speech laws and stuff like that. And it just happens that people who might use different pronouns and stuff were then included in that particular group. But nobody has gone to jail for misgendering someone. That is just absolutely ridiculous. But you know, that's where his fame and fortune came from, unfortunately. Okay, so why don't we get into the video with Rachel Gilmore? She is an independent journalist here in Canada. She does fantastic work. I can't recommend enough that people go and check out her YouTube channel, her TikTok. She's on Twitter. Go follow her there. And she put together a 9-minute video also breaking this down. And she digs into some of the other stuff that wasn't mentioned in that thread.
I watched the Jordan Peterson interview with Pierre Poilievre, so you don't have to. You guys really owe me for this one. Because some stuff was said that Canadians need to know that the dude who is probably going to lead the country next is actually saying. But it was buried in an interview that is an hour and 40 minutes long. That's longer than it would take me to rewatch Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. Anyways, in between screaming at my phone, I took a lot of notes, so let's dive in. And trust me, the end is the worst part, so stick around. To start things off, in case you live under a rock, Pierre Poilievre is the Conservative leader who is currently leading in the polls and is very likely to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. And he sat down with Jordan Peterson, who became famous for refusing to use his students' preferred pronouns, who now spends his time posting transphobia, screaming about woke, and sharing, human milking videos? So
there's a tweet that I'm going to be covering later on that was dredged up by, that Jordan Peterson did. And it was so bad that I'm like, this has to be fake, because people are just sharing screen grabs of it. And so often when that happens, and you can't be too sure these days, I looked up his account. It's a real tweet. And we'll get to that later on. And it is horrific. Like, Jordan is an absolute piece of trash person. And like, just again, the things that he got famous for was because he didn't want to respect his students' pronouns. Oh no, it's free speech for me to misgender you. Yeah, you're free to be an asshole, but if you want to have a position of power and stuff, and if you do it intentionally to hurt them, then yeah, it can fall under the hate speech laws. But like, he got famous by trying to make himself into like the biggest crybaby victim out there.
So yeah, things are going great. And while Poilievre and Peterson took their time to wade into the weirdness like crabs in boiling water, by the end of the chat, they said some truly unhinged stuff. To kick things off, they talked about how Poilievre spends his days, which honestly wasn't very interesting, beyond him revealing that he's done 600 events in the last year. And while he framed those events as visiting factories, farms, mills, and mines, we know it's also a ton of rallies, even though we're not in an election campaign yet. Anyway.
And taxpayers paid for pretty much all of that. Taxpayers paid for the transportation and stuff, because even though, like, when it comes to rallies and stuff, we're not in campaign, taxpayers shouldn't be paying for it, or if it's any sort of personal travel and stuff like that, he found little loopholes so he could actually charge the taxpayers for it. So those 600 rallies were paid for by the Canadian people.
Anyways, the two move on to discussing why people feel like they can't get ahead. And this is where we get one of my early favorite moments, one of the few times Poilievre speaks about women specifically.
If you're a young woman who's got a biological clock, obviously, well, do the math.
Pointing out that we can't start families because of the housing crisis, which is part of the problem, for sure. But God, am I tired of pasty dudes acting like my lot in life is to make babies.
To raise their kids with good traditional values.
But this part of the discussion is also where we see one of the first hints of this really sneaky thing that Poilievre does throughout.
It really bugs me when men talk about women's biological clocks. Like, men don't also have them. Like, and it's not a biological clock. There's a lot of people who just have a desire to have children. And there are people who don't have a desire to have children. I am one of those people. I never wanted to have children. I never had the urge or the desire to have it. And to act like it's restricted to women only, in that there aren't a lot of men out there who also want to start families and who also don't have a biological clock, is ridiculous. But I agree with Rachel too. Like, just this idea of, making women seem like they're nothing more than people out there, that their lot in life is to just have children. Like, that's their whole point. Like, that's why women exist, is to have babies. That's what all women want to do. That's their biological clocks. And a lot of people, especially with birth control and stuff like that, they realize that they can't afford to have children, or, the way that we're socialized these days and how segregated families are, because it used to be that communities would help to raise children, that there would be supports and daycares and things of that sort. But more and more and more is just being put on an individual, often the mother, especially if there's a separation. And that's not to say that there aren't wonderful fathers out there. There absolutely are. And there's lots of wonderful single fathers as well. Generally speaking, though, the bulk goes on to the mother. And just the idea that there aren't the resources and the supports there to allow people who want to have children to be able to afford to have children is a fault in our government. Like, I'm all for people who don't want to have children. The government should help with that. Like, if you want to have your tubes tied or a vasectomy or something of that sort, instead of the doctor patting you on the head and saying, oh, well, your husband might want children in the future. So they're not going to do that. They should allow us to not have kids. Like, they should allow us to make the decisions about our body. The same with access to abortion. We should have that right to choose when we have children if we want them. But also for the people who want to have children, the government should be doing what it can to support that. So there needs to be better access to daycare, better access to health care, better access to schooling, proper schooling, nutrition, food, groceries, proper housing, all of that sort of things, so that children are also raised in a healthy environment.
The interview. He's often diagnosing problems correctly, but his solutions are, to quote the guy who called this a great interview, concerning. Take, for example, when he's talking about business investment, and he points out that US business investment is higher per worker than Canadian business investment. He literally took the total business investment for both countries and divided it by their number of workers. He tells us that the US having a higher business investment per worker means they will, quote,
be able to crank out even greater wages for their people than we will.
He also takes Canada's GDP and divides it per worker and implies that this is sort of the output per worker that Canada has. And he says that because it's 60% lower than the GDP per worker than Americans, we have to work 60% more to have the same amount of income to buy food.
That's reflected in the fact that our 2 million people are lined up at food banks because they can't afford food.
What? That doesn't make sense, because in both of these examples, he's assuming that when businesses make more money and when businesses invest more, that will go into workers' wages, which is hilarious. Take Amazon, for example, which is the 5th largest.
That's Pierre again, mixing up the ideas of what socialism and capitalism is.
Company by market cap in the world. Go ahead and ask the workers at Amazon if they're feeling that increase in wages that corresponds with the business doing that well. Go on, ask. But Poilievre is not even beginning to discuss the idea of forcing companies to pay their workers more. He's just assuming they will, and perhaps more egregiously, telling Canadians that they will. That is a false promise, and he's hoping that between his serious stare and his numbers and statistics, you won't notice the illogical leaps. The same thing happens when he talks about inflation. He says something like it's a fact when it's not, and obviously Peterson doesn't challenge him on it.
According to the Bank of Canada, we've got the 2nd lowest inflation in the G7.
And compared to our G7 counterparts, we've actually had the sharpest growth of GDP. Now, I'm not going to do.
I still will push back on inflation talk when it says it's the lowest inflation, so, be happy and stuff. I've covered it plenty of times. Inflation isn't experienced the same for everyone, depending on their income bracket. And for the bottom 60%, inflation is actually worse. For the upper 40%, inflation is great. It's gone down. It's wonderful. But then there's also the invisible inflation that I talk about, where things that used to be free are no longer free, are now being charged. So when it comes to inflation, that is somewhere where I will push back and say that it is horrible for most people in this country. Yet we're constantly being told it's not that bad, it's in your head. No, it's not.
What the Liberals like to do here and say this means that everything is fine. Because it's not. Because a lot of Canadians are struggling, and would you look at that? Wealth inequality just hit the highest level ever recorded in our country. So you're not struggling because of government spending on programs that help the vulnerable. You're struggling because the rich don't want to share. Which brings us back to the lie in Poilievre's first point. Or if he's not lying, he's being totally naive. He seems to think that businesses doing better and making more money means Canadians will too. But that's just not happening. The same problematic logic applies to
No, whenever there's excess profits, it just goes to the CEOs of the company. It doesn't actually get filtered back down to the employees. It doesn't end up going back into the coffers of the government to go into our social programs or anything. It's just money being hoarded at the top while everyone else receives less and less and less. Hence, the income inequality gap keeps on growing.
Poilievre's view on housing. He says he wants to build more houses, and that's great. He actually has some good ideas here, like combating NIMBYism and pushing for faster approvals, which is cool provided it doesn't lead to corner cutting. But he also implies housing prices would go down if developers didn't have to spend so much on bureaucracy, which he used really broadly. Like, he applied the term bureaucracy to developers spending money on lobbying.
The consultants, lawyers, accountants, lobbyists that the developer has to hire in order to get the approval. So in other words, we're spending twice in Vancouver. We spend twice as much on bureaucrats than we do on all other things combined to build a home.
Which leads me once again to ask, why would you assume those developers would pass those savings along to buyers instead of pocketing the increased profit? At this point, Poilievre also says we need to free up more land for construction and points out that Canada's huge, so why are we having trouble building more houses?
We've got so much land. Like, we should have the most affordable housing in the world. It should be dirt cheap because we have the most dirt.
First of all, there are some very good reasons why most Canadians live within 100 kilometers of the US border. A lot of Canada is not very habitable. We also have a lot of protected land like the Greenbelt, and we know how badly developers want to get their grubby little paws on that. Just ask Doug Ford. But if we build on that land, the consequences here for things like biodiversity are genuinely dystopian. So let's hope that's not what he means by freeing up more land. Moving on. Another thing that made me laugh were the insane ads throughout the interview. Like when Poilievre was talking about young Canadians being exhausted because they have to work while being in school, the video paused to sell us a supplement if we're feeling sluggish. But another one of the video's main sponsors is a pro-life organization.
Yep. Like I said earlier in the stream, if Poilievre when he gets into power, we're going to fight like hell in order to keep our reproductive rights. Because he is looking to take that away. He is absolutely looking to take that away.
With Poilievre still visible in the background, a voiceover tells the story of a woman who already has 8 children and a quote-unquote tumultuous marriage. They say she found out she was pregnant and could not bear the thought of having another child, but they convinced her to. That's where they end her story and frame it as a victory. That is what seemingly lined Peterson's pockets during his interview with Pierre Poilievre. Yikes. Back to the interview itself, Poilievre just does his usual thing where he lies about socialism and calls everyone a socialist even when they're not. In fact, he calls Trudeau an
authoritarian socialism.
I don't think we need to dive into any of this because it's just dumb, and it distracts from serious conversation about government policy, like the fact that the carbon tax is a market-based solution, which is actually what the conservative approach to climate change should be, and not a super progressive far-left socialist one. But instead, we have Poilievre talking about environmentalists like this.
You want to talk to these environmental loons.
most concerning part of the interview, though, happens at the end. It really, in 2025, should be disqualifying. But then again, so should taking Jordan Peterson seriously, and Poilievre does this.
On behalf of all Canadians, I want to thank you for your immense courage and the personal political and non-political price that you have paid for standing up for your convictions and defending freedom of speech.
Anyways, Poilievre and Peterson had a nice little chat about racism, in which they discuss it being imported into Canada as if it didn't exist before.
Put aside race, this obsession with race that wokeism has reinserted.
Well, invented even.
Invented in many ways.
When I moved to Toronto, it was as race blind as any country, as any city could be.
Right.
Right. And that's flipped. And it's flipped because of that obsessive concern with race. Right. That was something we 100% did not need in Canada. Yeah. Right. We basically,
as soon as people wanted to have equal treatment and equality and all that sort of stuff, suddenly racism was a problem. Before, when people were treated differently and nobody said anything about it, well, that's what they want to go back to.
What would you say? Imported and invented racism in Canada. Right.
Well,
as a consequence of policy.
And Poilievre blames an increase in hate crimes on wokeism. Not, of course, on the documented rise of the far right within Canada. Or the rise of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Right. But instead, Poilievre blames it on people recognizing existing inequities in our society.
Wokeism seeks to divide people into these different groups and subgroups, and we see the results in a 250% increase in hate crimes. But we're going to get back to the basic principle that people are judged based on their individual character.
They're literally doing the whole I don't see color bit, which is a great way of shutting down vital discussions about racism and systemic inequities that are baked into our society, which will continue to exist and hurt people regardless of whether Jordan Peterson and Pierre Poilievre believe it's happening. So there you have it, Canada's probable next Prime Minister in all of his glory. What do you think of all of this?
So here we have Guy Felicia, somebody that I have talked about plenty of times already on my channel. He's an advocate. He has survived drug overdoses. He's used to be an addict, but he has overcome that. And he's now an advocate for people who are suffering with addiction and housing issues and things of that sort. So he's gotten really involved with that type of politics and stuff. So here he has, Canadians are being conned by Pierre Poilievre, and it's heartbreaking to see. What jumps out the most to me about this interview he did with fawning right-wing extremist Jordan Peterson, they clearly lay out the way they're stirring up rage with carefully calculated campaign slogans and then capitalizing on people's anger over it, especially young men's. Pierre says before every speaking engagement, his team analyzes mainstream, ethnic, and independent media, downloads all the local social commentary, and then decides what topic of the day will be based on what people are mad about. Again, Pierre Poilievre's strategy is spot on. Like, he is putting the work into it, and it is paying off. Like, to do this type of analysis, like the Liberals, they refuse to do any sort of analysis of what the people want or what they're saying, and they just like to keep their head in the clouds about what's going on. To focus it like this for each speaking engagement so that he can hit the points that is really resonating with people, that is very sound strategy right there. And a little bit of an example of this type of thing again, if we go back here. So this is Peter Julian, he's an MP, and says this is part of a massive foreign interference strategy, which is the only reason Pierre Poilievre is leader of the Conservative Party right now. And so this is a reminder that after one speaking engagement that Pierre Poilievre was at Kirkland, I covered it at the time, there was a mass campaign of people, like literally more people than the amount of people who lived in that tiny little town were saying almost the identical thing. Like, just came from the rally, really excited, that sort of thing. Still buzzing after attending Pierre Poilievre's recent rally in Kirkland, Ontario. And this is, again, part of the work and the strategy that he's putting into being where he is. And he has to put in a lot of that work because, again, he is very uncharismatic. He is not a likable person. And the policy he wants to put through is absolutely horrendous. it'd be nice to actually see other political parties put in this much effort. So take his response here on racism and his claim of a 250% increase in hate crimes due to wokeism. Every single part of that statement is false. According to Public Safety Canada, hate crimes rose 7% in 2022 after a bigger increase, 72% from 2019 to 2021. But that it wasn't wokeism that caused those increases. It was anti-Asian hate over blame for the pandemic, then outrage over racially motivated policing and a backlash to that outrage. Now it's rising again because of October 7th attack on Israel and the war in the Middle East. No one invented or imported racism. It was already here. And these fake claims about wokeism and identity politics make it worse. They have made it okay to punch down on minority groups. There's your increase in hate crimes. That's just one example from an almost 2-hour interview full of distorted half-truths and full-on lies. There's no real solution, just anger, unless you count his plans to cut out social programs and his idea to solve housing crisis by building homes in the Arctic, I guess, since we have so much unoccupied land there. This interview makes me sad for our country, for all of us. He's not going to achieve the things conservative voters think he will, and we're all going to suffer for it. Like, that's the thing. He seeks out, he finds out what people are mad about, and then he just kind of pokes that wound, and he stokes that flame, and he makes that so much worse. And it's horrifying that he's been allowed to get away with it so long because there's no real pushback from the mainstream media or from other government officials in the NDP or the Liberal parties. The NDP do call him out more, but they don't do a good job of campaigning on it. They don't do a good job of making it known, like really grabbing social media by the algorithm. And the Conservatives have definitely done that. And, you know, a large battlefront of all future politics will be done on social media because that's increasingly where more and more people spend their time to get their information, their news, to connect with friends and families and stuff of that sort. It's less through mainstream media, more through social media. And like I said, we then run into the issue of everyone being in their own those things that people can be in. Cylon? I'm saying it wrong. I know that. Silo. In their own silo. That's it. I had like 12 different words in one. We're all in our silos of different information and stuff, which making it harder and harder to communicate. And then it's harder and harder to understand where people's anger is coming from, where they want to see the changes and all that sort of stuff. And that's just going to become a bigger and bigger problem. But Guy also added on to what he was saying. I continue to be baffled by the positive reception to this interview. Wasn't Jordan Peterson called out under oath by Justin Trudeau for being paid by Russia? And hasn't Pierre Poilievre, and why hasn't Pierre Poilievre gotten his security clearance? Both very true. Now, again, part of the positive reaction, as we saw, he has well over 2 million views on that video so far. A lot of them are probably not authentic views. Like, that's the other thing that social media has a problem with, is that it can make things seem more popular than they actually are through paid bots or views or counts and likes and things of that sort. You don't know how many humans are actually engaging with the content. So it's hard to gauge it, but then you see all of a sudden like, wow, over 2 million people. And even then, even if it's, you know, a large chunk of that is not real, that's still a lot of people that are real. And, you know, they know how to grab social media by the algorithm, and they've been doing it, and they've been spreading their message that way. And, you know, unless one of the other parties can really start breaking through those algorithms, the Conservatives are going to win this. And here we have Mark Miller, who is an MP. Not the biggest surprise in the world to see these two greasy walruses promoting each other's ego. Is this where we're headed? And just kind of like greasy walruses. But it is good to see some politicians actually speaking out against what's happening. But like, where is the counteraction? Where are they going on to leftist media and promoting their interviews and their talking points and getting their messaging out there. Like, all they ever do is react to what the conservatives are already doing. That's all the Liberal Party ever does, is they react. They don't preemptive anything. They don't preemptively take a strike. They don't preemptively do their own promotion. They're just constantly reacting to whatever the conservatives do. And that just, it makes them look weak, because they are. But I do like the term greasy walruses. And Amber Mack here, best-selling author, speaker moderator, president at Amber Mack Media, hosts the feed on Sirius XM. So let me get this straight. Some people are more offended by this "two greasy walruses" comment than a potential future PM who uses incel hashtags and decides to kick off his new year on a podcast sponsored by a group that condemns gay marriage and reproductive care for women and praises and promotes a host who largely denies racism exists in Canada and who supports enforced monogamy. That's quite the sentence. And I just want to remind people here, when she mentions incel hashtags, this was a thing. A lot of videos, political videos, contents, clips that he was putting out there, one of the hashtags he was using is MMIGW or men go their own way type thing. And they were actual like incel hashtags that were being buried into this to help it again promote in the algorithm with a lot of the ultra right wing. And so, instead of calling it out, condemning it or whatever, the conservatives just kind of use it as a freeway into the algorithms of all these right wingers to gain their eyeballs, to gain their support. Please bookmark this tweet because I am fearful about where we are heading this year. Also, this tweet is not about our current prime minister. It's about who the next potential one might actually be. In fact, he's telling us right now, open your ears and listen. Canadian women deserve better. And so she had a link to this website here. Just kind of glance over it, but it's just a breakdown of here's why Jordan Peterson is the fucking worst. So this is a good resource if you want to find more about Jordan Peterson. We'll quickly glance over this. The man in the myth, Jordan Peterson is a highly influential person, particularly with men. Peterson is a conservative self-help guru who went from teaching psychology at the University of Toronto to being a notorious leader of a culture wars against wokeness, or as we call it, basic human decency. His channel has 6 million subscribers and boasts almost 500 million views, and it's not even including his interviews or other people's uploads of him. My channel should have 6 million people. Like, let's just again imagine if just for a moment those over 2 million people were all Canadian. There's only 40 million Canadians. That's a large percentage of Canadians would have seen that interview, but a large part of them are not Canadian because Jordan Peterson has a much larger market in the United States. So what this interview does is it helps promote Pierre Poilievre to the right-wing media circuit in the United States so that they will then start promoting him and talking good about him to their audiences. And then that kind of... So think of it as like a wave, like they push the wave out, but then it comes back and they keep on circulating it as such. So Jordan Peterson will blast it out to his audience. It gets picked up by Fox News and stuff. And then it comes back to some Canadian audience and it goes back and forth because, like I keep on trying to build on my channel, we need more cross-border solidarity on the left. The right has it down. They are supporting each other. They are amplifying each other. And we're not doing nearly as well on the left. But again, just part of it is on the left, we don't have the same financial resources as the right. And it's an uphill battle with the algorithms because the algorithms aren't partisan. They're just there for the money. And the money is where the clicks are and the clicks are where the rage is. And the rage tends to be on the right. So that's where we run into the problems. But like, unless there's a way to absolutely break the algorithm so that it's not catering to right wing, there's not much we can do about it, but we have to find ways. Like, just because it's more difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Like, we have to find workarounds. We have to find ways around it because we absolutely need more cross-border solidarity on the left. So here's a former tweet. This is not the bad tweet I was talking about. Nazis, white supremacists, these simply do not exist in Canada. There's no culture of such things in Canada, political or otherwise. Oh, I beg to differ, and we'll get into it. So his content is deliberately and carefully constructed, covertly hiding his bigotry and his beliefs and grounding his claims in supposed psychological and scientific discourse and leveraging his PhD. But that's the thing, he's claiming science when at best it's pseudoscience being catered towards a moral panic to spread his hate and division further. His solution to incel violence is enforced monogamy, which is horrible because, like, they don't, whenever anybody on the right says there needs to be enforced monogamy, what they're leaving out is what that actually means. Because, okay, so you force a couple to be together, and that's to help with basically the sex, so that the man can have the sex so he's not as violent. But what if he gets forced into a monogamous relationship with somebody who doesn't want to sleep with him? Then what happens? You're forcing these people to be together when they don't want to be, but what typically then would happen in that dynamic to the woman? That's what they're calling for when they say enforced monogamy. So I guess this is another tweet he had sent out. Could casual sex necessitate state tyranny? The missing responsibility has to be enforced somehow. So this is the bill C-16. That was the adding gender expression and identity to current existing hate speech laws here in Canada. That's the thing he got famous for. He's disgustingly transphobic. He was misgendering Elliot Page and calling his surgeon a butcher, that sort of thing. Jordan Peterson believes that society discriminates against straight white men. Ooh. Jordan Peterson is the worst. Rapid fire edition. So again, you can go over all of this yourself to just get a good sense of who he is. It's a long article, so we have a lot more to cover in this. So, look at it, bookmark it. It's good to have just in the back of in your back pocket, so that when people say, but he's a really, Jordan Peterson is a really smart guy, you can then be like, but he called Trudeau banning conversion therapy moral grandstanding, believes that if women wear makeup in the workplace and complain about sexual harassment, they're hypocritical at fault. Straight up doesn't believe climate science and says there is no such thing as climate, believes that it's necessary for kids to have models, i.e. parents of both sexes, stated that Islamophobia is a word created by fascists and used to manipulate morons, believes white privilege is a Marxist lie. And more from Amber Mack. This is Trending Podcast episode with Pierre Poilievre is sponsored by Preborn, an anti-abortion group that proudly says homosexuality is a sin. Marriage should only be between a man and a woman. Medical abortions murder the souls of mothers. So this is just showing the ad that's linked to Jordan Peterson's. Like, he's actually tweeting it out. Today's sponsors of the video is this organization Preborn. I'm not going to read all of this. You can freeze the screen if you would like to read this uniform disclosure statement, and this is from that organization again. Not shockingly, they're like evangelical Christian type stuff, but it is a fairly long little note here. So, again, freeze frame it if you want to see it. So this is more from the organization. It's not just preborn lives who are murdered, but the very souls of the mothers who perform the abortions themselves. Preborn. Data reveals medical abortions now account for the majority of all abortions obtained in the United States. This has stunning ramifications, unleashing death and destruction on a scale we likely have not yet to witness. Like, just horrible, horrible people. And this is on their Instagram, the Preborn Instagram. Again, you can freeze frame it here. Super religious, transphobic, anti-choice garbage coming from this group that was sponsoring that interview that Pierre Poilievre was on. Again, make no mistake about it, Poilievre is coming for reproductive rights. So this is from Leah Gazan. She's an MP, an NDP MP here in Canada. I don't understand why people are so excited by this interview with Pierre Poilievre and Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is a raging, violent misogynist, but I guess that's Pierre Poilievre's idea of freedom. Freedom for a violent misogynist to say whatever they want, but not woke individuals fighting for gender equality who are a threat to their party at the frat boy house. I'm going to scroll down. You're going to see the tweet that I was talking about. And like I said, I searched it. It's real. From Jordan Peterson. And it's not a vagina, it's a hole for another man to fuck. And that's that. That is who the future Prime Minister of Canada was sitting down with. And that tweet is still live. It's still live. And just a little bit more from Leah. Reconfirming for me that Pierre Poilievre continues to be a residential school denialist. Guess he also forgot about the slave trade and all the internment camps in Canada for the Japanese, Ukrainians, Jews, Chinese, Italian. He apparently missed those apologies. I guess PP think it's woke to read a history book. And in the next part of my video, I'll be getting into some more of the actual history of racism here in Canada and whatnot. But yeah, it's in the foundation of this country. This country was very literally built on white nationalism. That was the goal when they came over here. Stefano tweeting this out. Oh, surprise. Musk is promoting both Poilievre and Peterson. Canada, open your fucking eyes. All the worst elements of the world are pushing Poilievre. India, Russia, China, Musk, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, etc. Rise up in your patriotism and don't vote for Poilievre in the cons. Yeah, all of these people, like there's the whole, there's the Russian interference with the media and stuff like that. We got that. India, they have operations here, but Pierre Poilievre refuses to get his security clearance for reasons, because it would he probably wouldn't qualify at this point. That's the only reason why I can think it. But should he become prime minister, he automatically gets it, and that should be a disqualifier. If you can't qualify for security clearance, you shouldn't be allowed to be prime minister. It shouldn't be done the other way around. But Elon Musk tweeting out that it's a great interview to all of his bazillion followers on Twitter. And Jagmeet Singh, leader of the federal NDP, Elon Musk and other billionaires back Pierre Poilievre because if he wins, they'll get richer. Poilievre is clear in his interview that he will cut healthcare and more. He will cut from you and give to CEOs what they want. The middle class will pay even more and the rich will get even richer. And so this upcoming election, Elon Musk will do on Twitter what he did in the United States. There's no doubt about it. And that technically could be considered foreign interference in this country. And it is illegal for people outside of this country to try to influence people during an election. I doubt that there will be any consequences, though. That's the thing. I doubt that the government will do anything. I doubt social media will do anything. Like, for me, the number one rule that should be implemented on all social medias is that government officials in any sort of political material are not allowed to lie. Let's just start at that. They're not allowed to lie. Because right now, they can lie. They can absolutely lie. But again, this is very reactive. They always react to what the conservatives are doing. They never do a preemptive. They never do something that would then force the conservatives to react to them. It's always the Liberals and the NDP reacting to the horrible shit that's already happened.